Welcome back. We are still in Module 2, the legal basis of the music business, and this is Lesson 6. Now, the title of this is Copyright Infringement, but I like to subtitle this particular class, When Good Times Turn Bad. This is a very important class, obviously. Copyright infringement is the basis of a very large number of lawsuits, not as many as you think. A lot of copyright infringement cases you might read about in the paper, in the newspaper or online, but they don't always make their way through to the courts. A lot of what you read about in the newspapers is kite flying, people talking about a potential infringement, but at the end of the day, their lawyer says to them, no, you don't have a case, don't bother. So not all of these alleged infringements that you hear about end up in court. Some do though, and you don't want to be one of those people, and this is how to avoid that. Now, in order to go forward, sometimes you have to take a step back. And just to revisit what copyright protects. Copyright protects literary works, dramatic works, musical works, artistic works, films, sound recordings, broadcast and published editions. So, you can't have your copyright infringed unless your work is one of those things. So that's your first hurdle. You have to have a copyright work for a copyright infringement case to occur. Now, what happens with a copyright work is hopefully that copyright work is exploited. Now, key point here, you read the word exploited in relation to copyright a lot. Copyright exploitation is not a bad thing. Copyright exploitation without the permission of the copyright owner is a bad thing. Now, you've probably heard the word exploit or exploitation, and naturally you consider that to be not a great thing. You've heard that, growing up, and exploitation equals bad, and I understand that. But the word exploitation, when it comes to copyright, simply means that the copyright work is being used in some manner. A record company exploits the copyright in a recording, and you want them to do that. Exploiting the copyright means selling the recording or streaming it or whatever it is that you want them to do. Copyright exploitation, not a bad thing. Copyright exploitation without the permission of the copyright owner is a bad thing, and that's called copyright infringement. So what copyright infringement really is the use of somebody's work in a manner that only the copyright owner would use the work, or should be able to use the work, but that is being done without the permission of the copyright owner. And that has repercussions, legal repercussions. You can get sued for copyright infringement. So, here's the basic rule of copyright infringement. Let me read this to you so we get it 100% accurate. Copyright infringement is the use of another's copyright material without the copyright owner's consent. That amounts to a copyright infringement if the unauthorized use is of a substantial part of the work and if an exception permitting that use does not apply. Let me unpack that one for you. All right, a couple of key words there, and I've made it easy for you. I've put them in bold type. It has to be an unauthorized use of your work. So if a record company under your recording contract releases your music, you can't suddenly turn around and go, but I'm now going to sue you for copyright infringement because you've authorized it, you've given them permission. But it can't just be any part of your work, it has to be a substantial part. And trust me, I'll unpack what substantial means in a minute. And sometimes you're allowed to infringe copyright. Sometimes there is an exception to this rule that allows copyright infringement to occur. So that's the process that you need to go through. The first thing you need to do is identify what the original work is. Now that shouldn't be too hard. That might be your song, it might be your recording, it might be the manuscript that you've written, it might be a script that you've come up with, it might be a photograph that you've taken. It's pretty easy to identify what the original work is because it's your work. Well, it's your work that you allege is being infringed. So you know what your original work is. Then you have to identify what has been taken from your work and used in the subsequent work. Taken from your work, used in the subsequent work. Now that might be a word. This book here has 168,000 words in it. Surprise, surprise, the word music comes up in that book a lot. So does that mean that anyone writing a book and using the word music is infringing my copyright? Of course not. I don't own copyright over the word music. So I can't say, well, I had a book that had music in it, just as a songwriter can't say, well, I had a melody that had the chord of E flat in it. I don't even know if that's a chord, but even if it is, you can't say, oh, well, you know, nobody is allowed to use that chord again. I've already used that one. Clearly, that is not a copyright infringement. Why? Because the part that's been taken from the original work is not a substantial part of the original work. You have to ask yourself, is it a substantial part of the original work? Now, this is where a lot of people get confused. A lot of people think, well, it's what use they make of it. They've taken my melody and they've constructed a whole song around my melody. Doesn't matter. The question is it a substantial part of your original work? And if it's not, it doesn't matter what they did with it. They can make your tiny little melody and extrapolate that into a symphony, and that's not copyright infringement. It's a question of, is it a substantial part of your original work? All right, now for the question that all lawyers love. What is a substantial part? Lawyers love words like substantial and reasonable. You know, what is reasonable in the circumstances? Well, who knows what is reasonable? It's what a reasonable person would think. Lawyers love these vague words like substantial. Lawyers have also, and courts, have wrestled with what is a substantial part. And they've come up with a few answers. Unfortunately, none of those answers is the one that you want. You all want me to say, yep, a substantial part is less than 10%. Or sorry, more than 10%. You want me to say that. Or you want me to say, no, it's not 10%, it's 10 seconds. If you use a sample of more than 10 seconds, you're copyright infringing. If it's less than 10 seconds, you're not. It would be great if there was a really simple rule of thumb like that. But sadly, there is not. So again, if you're in the bar, if you're in the club, and somebody is, you'd have to be fairly boring to be in a bar and a club and talking about copyright infringement, but yeah, if that's what turns you on, if that's the conversation that you're having, and somebody says to you, hey, I know what the rule is, less than 10%, you're fine, more than 10%, you have to get permission, they're wrong. There is no 10% rule, there is no 10-second rule, and when you think about it, that's going to be obvious. And this is the reason why. Courts have said, no, it's not a qualitative measure. 10%, 10 seconds, that is not going to cut it. What we need is a definition of substantial part that's based on quality rather than quantity. It needs to be a qualitative issue. Now, quality doesn't mean how good it is, but it does mean how memorable or distinctive or vital it is. So what might be a substantial part of one work, one little phrase, one musical riff, one melody, one lyrical idea, that might be a substantial part of one work and not a substantial part of another work. and it really is based on quality rather than quantity. So, basing it on quality rather than quantity, what sort of words would a court throw around? They would say, is it important to the nature of the work? Is it distinctive? Is it a vital building block of that work? Is it an essential part of the original work? Not how big it is in terms of seconds or percentage, but how important is it to the overall work of the original creator? Now, in one case, 6 notes was regarded as being a substantial part. You know, a very brief little melody. But when you stopped and heard that, you go, well, yeah, the whole song though, you hear that melody, you hear those 6 notes, and that really is the part that sticks out. It's the part that you remember. So an obvious example for you to think about here is David Bowie and Queen's song Under Pressure. And if you hear that distinctive bass line, and excuse my out of melody singing, dum 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 dum, everyone at home, everyone watching this, everyone in the room here straight away went, yeah, I know that song, Under Pressure, David Bowie and Queen, I know the song. When Vanilla Ice took that very small part, and when you think about the whole of Under Pressure, think about the lyrics and the melody and the verses and the choruses and the middle 8 and all of the composition that went into that song. And at the end of the day, dum 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 isn't qualitatively a large part of the song. But is it distinctive? Is it memorable? Is it vital? Is it an essential part of that song? Absolutely. And so when Vanilla Ice took that sample without permission, that would clearly be a copyright infringement. That's one example. There are obviously hundreds of others. So another way of infringing copyright is not by sampling an exact part, but by paraphrasing. You can follow the structure or the order of another person's work, so that if that structure and that order, that underlying skeleton, if you like, of the work is something that you've followed and repeated, that could be a copyright infringement. It doesn't have to be, you know, an actual sample taken from the recording. If you create something with the same elements, that could also be a copyright infringement. Now, you're probably thinking, gee, it's a bit of a minefield. How would I know, you know, when something is a copyright infringement and when it's not? And the answer is, it's difficult. And I'm sorry, I'm going to apologise on behalf of the entire legal profession and tell you that, sadly, I wish it was more simple. But obviously there's really solid legal reasons why you can't just say it's 10%. Sorry, it would be great if you could. All right, now, in order for there to be a copyright infringement, there's another element required, and that element is called a causal link. Now, if someone creates a copyright work that is very similar to yours, but that similarity is pure coincidence, and they have not copied your work, it's not a copyright infringement. Now, a lot of people are surprised by this. They think, oh, that song and my song are almost identical songs. And yet, for some reason, my lawyer's telling me that, no, you don't have a copyright infringement action. And the reason for that, my lawyer is telling me, is because when I wrote my song, nobody ever heard it. I kept it in the bottom drawer. Nobody heard it. There is no possibility that the other songwriter could have infringed or could have copied my song, because my song was never heard. There was no link between my song and the other song. Now, that's why copyright infringement cases normally relate to very successful popular songs. Why? Because you can assume that the second songwriter will have heard the first song. If the first song is an Ed Sheeran song or a very, very popular song, you could almost guarantee that every songwriter in the world would have heard it at some point. And there's a lot of cases about songs being sent to music publishers and that music publisher sharing it with one of their already signed songwriters. So where there is a causal link, you have to show that there is a possibility that that second songwriter, and this applies to any kind of creative work, that they had access to your work and that there was some connection between the original work and their work. The reason that pure coincidence is not enough is quite simple. All of you musicians out there, you'll be well aware there is only so many black and white keys on the keyboard, and there is only so many melodies, and there is only so many songs that can be written with a limited number of notes and a limited number of words. It is possible for two independent songwriters to come up with songs that are really, really similar, quite independently of each other. And that does happen. And that generally will not constitute copyright infringement. All right, so this is not full-blown legal advice. Do not go and launch a lawsuit based on what I just said. Every case is different, and as a result, you need to, before you run off to the media or run off to your lawyer, well, actually do run off to your lawyer. If you think that there's been a copyright infringement, you really do need legal advice. It's not as simple as, hey, my song sounds like that one, I think I'm going to get rich. Yeah, it'd be nice if you could do that. Well, it wouldn't be very nice for the original songwriter who actually created the work. So it is complicated. It's not as simple as playing two songs next to each other and going, see, my song sounds like that other person's song, or vice versa. There are a lot of factors to be taken into account, and as an artist, you're not expected to be a copyright lawyer. If you suspect that somebody has infringed your work, by all means go to a copyright lawyer and discuss the circumstances of your case with them. But it's not as simple as two songs sound alike, yay, I've just won the lottery. It really doesn't work like that. So it is complicated, but be aware of those basic rules, and hopefully most of the time will keep you out of court. All right, complicated lesson, important lesson, and I wish there was an easier answer to some of those questions, but sometimes the truth is not easy. Okay, thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next lesson.